So my sister made her first drum loop. She is not really a musician by any means of the word. She had a few piano lessons and a few guitar lessons when she was a kid, but now as an adult she's basically got zero musical knowledge except that she really likes electronic music. So I told her, hey Tessa, why don't you follow my Foundations of Electronic Music course? It's actually aimed at absolute beginners. And so she started and she made herself her first little drum loop, and this is what it sounds like. All right. Excellent stuff, Tessa. Well done. This has so many good things in it already. Let's address them. Let's talk about all the good things about it, and then let's talk about the ways in which we can develop it further. So what we're hearing in my mind is a 4-bar loop, which is actually two 2-bar loops, because I feel like there's a musical motif that repeats itself over the space of 2 bars. It goes boom kits, boom kits, boom kits, boom and then starts again, right? So that's 8 kick drums, which is 2 bars. So that's 8 kick drums before the loop reasserts itself, right? And we've got the core elements of any house beat. So we've got a kick, a hi-hat and a clap. And then we've got some cool things like we've got a splash or a marker sound at the start and then a riser at the end so that the energy kind of swells up and then lets go over the course of a loop. This is all perfect and excellent and a solid foundation. Inside of this loop, I would say there are 2 strong musical decisions that have been made. So let's put some words to them. The first musical decision is the rhythmic motif that you've established by making one of the hi-hats drag a little bit. So very often a house beat does nothing more than mark the time. It goes boom kits, boom kits, boom kits, boom kits. And there's nothing really going on there that's going to draw attention to itself. It's basically just a thing that marks the pulse. It marks time. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so if you include an element that breaks up this pulse, it's something that's going to draw attention to itself. It's something that's going to have some musical significance. And that's awesome, right? Especially in a pretty sparse drum groove, it will be kind of boring if nothing drew attention to itself. So having this one hi-hat arrive a little bit late definitely gives us some kind of motif, something that we can build on. And now it's just important to clarify in your mind that this is a musical decision that then has to be coherent with the other elements that you're going to add over the top of it so that the global groove of your track feels coherent. And so one thing that we're going to have to make sure now is that when we add more musical elements to the mix, we're going to eventually arrive at a situation that our song has a kind of a global groove to it where there are strong musical decisions. And so if we're going to use this hi-hat as a musical decision, let's accent it even further. Let's go even crazier. And so let's add in a little bit more percussion on it to make it seem even more intentional. See that? I've layered a clap on there so that now it's more accentuated. So it's something that comes back a lot in art creation, is just the idea of making strong choices. If you choose to do something, if you choose to make this hi-hat drag a little bit, then maybe go harder on that idea and accentuate it even further. Now, the second big musical decision that you've done with this loop is that there's like a little bit of a drone in there. There's like woo, 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 woo sound, right? Okay, so if I go to my piano and I find which note that is, the piano is off screen, you can't hear it, but that's okay. I'm hitting the G on the keyboard, right? So basically this G that's ringing out through this entire song gives us something that we might call a tonal center for the rest of our song. This G is an important note because it creates a canvas, it creates this atmosphere, right? So what we're not going to do is we're not going to choose, for example, a scale where G has no roll. We should absolutely choose a scale where G has a roll. And the most obvious solution there would be to choose G minor and just say that that G is our root note, and so our song is just in G minor. That works pretty well, right? And let's remind ourselves that G minor has exactly the same notes as B flat major. And in the music theory counting system that I use, I count everything from the major. So if we're going to program in some synths, let's just respect this G note and let's do a 6-4-2 chord progression, something fairly simple. Notice that in the programming pattern of these synthesizers, I also leave space for that rhythmical motif of that hi-hat, the clap and the hi-hat that goes pa-dum, right? So I'm doing what's essentially the equivalent of a dotted bass line, a dotted pattern. Watch this video on dotted eighth notes if that doesn't make sense to you. But basically dotted eighth notes are this classic pattern that you see coming back in a lot of dance music. Silence. So there's always a little break in between the notes. Clack. 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 That little space, that's the space in which that hi-hat motif can interrupt us, right? What we're looking for is to create a global groove where everything grooves together and the rhythms of the different elements aren't contradicting themselves to the point where you can't follow along and groove with it. And then what I did, and then what I did spontaneously is I took the fifth note of the scale, which is a D, and I just sang it out over the top, and it sounds like this. Don't worry, I'm not gonna leave it like that. I'm not gonna leave it like that. Let me show you what I did with that. So first I pitched it up an octave. Then put on a big old reverb. Then put on an OTT. Which brings up the high end. Then I put on a transgate. Then a bit of delay. In ping pong mode, of course. And then scooped out the low end. And I've got something that kind of sounds like a synthesizer, but made of my voice. That just sort of sits on the top. It's one of those things that reminds me of that podcast with Fred again, where he talks about using the voice a lot, to use it kind of like a synthesizer, where you don't recognize it as a voice anymore, but it does have a kind of a vocal quality that our ear still catches on to. And that thought process does resonate with me, and I see it in things like this. And let me do a little public service announcement about mastering, right? When you are beginning and you make a little drum loop like this, you might send it to yourself, listen to it on your phone or whatever, and then you say, oh my God, I'm such a noob, this sounds awful, right? One of the things that you're obviously missing is your song is not mastered, which means that the volume hasn't been brought up to be competitive or comparable with other songs in the genre. So quiet things are always going to sound a bit amateurish and unbalanced. And so I did a little rough self-mastering, and so without it, it sounds like this. And then, when I turn it on, it just sounds louder, fuller, brighter, rounder, right? And when something actually is mastered and it's brought up to the right volume, then you can switch between the mastered track and other released professional tracks and say, maybe my stuff doesn't sound so bad after all. For example, let's switch to these like bicep songs at the same volume. So if we go from our song to this bicep song, or this bicep song, or our song, over and back again, we're not sounding significantly worse. We are able to reach a comparable volume or impressiveness as a bicep track, and now all we need to do is think about, okay, is our sound design what we wanted? Is our storytelling, is the creative content what we want it to be? But that's a different question. But I feel like you should be encouraged by the fact that your original drum loop, which was this, at first glance sounds maybe thin and quiet, right? Eventually can become something like this, with just a few moves. I whipped up all the other elements in this in the space of like 20 minutes, so it's not rocket science. Anyway, as Tessa goes further through the foundations course, I hope to be able to coach her at various other steps. If you are a beginner struggling with music production, leave some questions in the comments to give me some inspiration for future videos. Come show us on the Discord channel what you did with this. And until next time, stay producing, be good to each other, and take care. Bye-bye.